The low winter sun glimmered across the frosted battlements of Winterfell, casting pale rays through the veil of drifting snow. The once proud fortress bore the marks of recent turmoil. Sections of the outer walls still showed the char of burning pitch, and the courtyard was strewn with splintered timbers and half-melted clumps of ice. Much of Winterfell's population had fled or perished. Silence hung over the courtyard, haunted by a faint, chilling breeze that crept in through the broken gates. Crows perched on parapets, occasionally letting out a harsh caw that echoed in the emptiness. Amid the devastation, Arya Stark stepped carefully, half-hooded in a heavy cloak of dark wool. Her breath clouded before her. The girl was a slip of a thing, ragged in appearance but grim with determination. She had crossed rivers and hidden in forests, stolen bread from the bakeries of battered towns, and followed stray tidings of turmoil in the north. Rumors had led her back here, to the seat of her ancient family, though she had never envisioned returning under such dire circumstances. She remembered Winterfell as lively and bustling, her father walking the ramparts, her brother sparring in the yard, her sister singing with some new fancy. Now every corner whispered of ghosts. She moved through the courtyard with measured steps, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. Part of her expected Roose Bolton's men, or any of the other occupying forces, to come streaming out of the keep to arrest her. But Winterfell seemed nearly deserted, ruined. Yet she had heard tales that Theon Greyjoy was imprisoned here, or had been. Initially, the notion filled her with scorn. He had once been her brother's friend, a ward raised in the Stark household, and yet had betrayed them all by taking Winterfell. For that, Arya felt a deep anger boiling beneath her skin. But the rumors told a different story after that. Theon had lost Winterfell as quickly as he'd claimed it, and now he suffered unspeakable tortures at the hands of Ramsay Bolton. That last name alone made her blood run cold. A Bolton had betrayed her family more thoroughly than even Theon could. And the more Arya heard these rumors, the more she felt them gnaw at her sense of justice, or perhaps vengeance. Now, she stood by the front steps leading into the ruined Great Hall. Snow piled in drifts where the roof had caved in. Through the broken arch, the hall was open to the sky, and pieces of charred rafter jutted like broken bones. She went inside, feeling an unsteady ache in her chest. The memory of feasts in that same great hall tugged at her. She recalled the banners of House Stark, the proud grey dire wolf on a field of white, and her father at the dais. How the hall had once been warm, alive with candlelight, and how she had snuck surreptitious glances at the men seated near him, Jory Castle, Roderick Castle, the memory blurred with grief. Now, the old dais was slumped sideways, partially collapsed from the fire. Ashes and snow swirled across the flagstones. No laughter, no voices. A hush so deep it weighed on her shoulders. She closed her eyes and breathed out, allowing a fleeting sorrow to pass. Then she forced herself to focus. The dungeons, she thought. That was where they would have kept him. If the rumors were true that the Boltons had left some token guard. It would be a hideous thing to do. Hold a prisoner within the bowels of his own stolen seat of power. And from what fleeting scraps of conversation Arya had overheard, Theon's captivity had become a sadistic game. Ramsay Bolton took glee in tormenting his captives. Arya felt anger swirl in her gut. It was not that she cared overmuch for Theon Greyjoy himself. She hated him for what he had done, for his betrayal of Robb, for capturing Winterfell, for the deaths that had ensued. But the Boltons made her think of the Red Wedding and the butchery that had befallen her family. Theon might have started this horror, but the Boltons had carried it forward with unrelenting brutality. In some corner of her mind, she imagined that perhaps, if she freed him, she might glean some advantage. If Theon was still alive and broken, he might have secrets to share. He might become something else, maybe a puppet to her vengeance. At the very least, she would not let the Boltons or their monstrous spawn continue their cruelty without interference. Perhaps it was an odd kind of justice. Theon had wronged her family, but she knew that no one deserved what Ramsay was rumored to do. Stoking a small flicker of resolve, Arya snuck carefully along the corridors. What guards might remain in Winterfell she did not know, but she moved quietly, the way she had learned from her time in Harrenhal and the streets of Braavos. The key was to be swift in shadows and invisible in plain sight. She recalled the lessons from Syrio Farrell, the water dancer who had told her how to move lightly as a cat. Though the idea of her old teacher brought a pang of sadness, it also gave her courage. Here, in the gloom of a half-collapsed corridor, she pressed her ear to a heavy door that led down to the crypts. The crypts were large, old, and labyrinthine. Her father's tomb would be there as well, among the old kings in the north. And deeper still, she suspected, might lie the dungeons, or some corner used as a makeshift prison. She heard no noise from the other side of the door. Carefully, she lifted the latch. The iron hinges shrieked, and she froze, heart pounding. Moments passed, but no rush of footsteps came. She exhaled slowly and slipped through. The door closed behind her with a muffled thud. A frigid draft snaked along the corridor within, which was lit only by a few guttering torches set into brackets on the walls. The steps spiraled downward, slick from melted snow that had dripped in through cracks in the stone. She stepped gingerly, leaning her weight forward so she would not slip, her hand braced on the damp wall. Her cloak brushed against her ankles and her breath hung in the air. At the first landing, she smelled something foul, rot and decay. She fought the urge to gag. She forced herself onward, descending deeper. She remembered how, in her childhood, she had always felt both fear and a strange sense of belonging in the crypts of Winterfell. They were supposed to be places of rest for her ancestors, after all. But now they reeked of old violence. She saw smears of dried blood on the stone near a corner. She saw deep scratches on the wall as though someone had tried to claw their way out. Her pulse quickened. She advanced, listening. The gloom seemed alive with unsettling echoes, but she detected a faint whimper, so slight that she wasn't certain if it was the wind. She crouched, heart pounding, and inched forward. The moan came again, more pronounced this time. She followed the sound, turning down a low-ceilinged corridor. The flickering light revealed an iron gate at the end, sealed with thick bars and a rusted lock. Beyond them, she saw only darkness. She moved closer, pressing an ear to the bars. That was when she heard it again, a trembling voice, hoarse and raw, more an animal's whine than words. But she caught the name he mumbled, something that might have been Reek. She remembered hearing that mocking name in rumors, how Ramsay twisted Theon's identity until he only knew himself as Reek. Arya swallowed thickly. She felt a rush of rage at the Boltons, at their cruelty, at the horror that had befallen her home. And yes, a flicker of pity for the one inside. She tried the gate. Locked. Of course. She glanced around for a key. She saw none. The lock looked old, but the bars were thick. She considered picking it, recalling the meager skill she had picked up from scoundrels along her travels. Yet that would take time, and she had no guarantee it would succeed. Perhaps she could find something to break the lock. She looked around, rummaging among broken crates near the corridor's walls. She found a length of iron and she tested its weight in her hands. With effort, she might break the lock or pry it open. When she levered it into the padlock's shackle, it screeched. She paused, listening to see if any guard might appear. Nothing came. So she pressed on, bracing her feet, straining with all her strength. The metal shrieked. Something cracked and the lock gave way. The gate swung open. She half expected a trap, some wave of men. But the passage remained quiet, save for the ragged breathing from within. She slipped inside. The stench nearly drove her to retch. Human waste and old blood stained the straw. In the far corner, a hunched figure cowered. He wore tattered rags and his hair was a matted tangle, unwashed for gods knew how long. He was trembling, rocking, murmuring something under his breath that Arya could not decipher. She felt a pang of revulsion. Could this be Theon Greyjoy, who had once walked these halls with that jaunty swagger, her brother Robb's companion? Had he not boasted of his conquests, of his skill with a bow? That arrogant grin was gone, replaced by a shell of a man. Steeling herself, she approached. He flinched when she laid a hand on his shoulder. Up close, she saw the raw stumps where pieces of his fingers had been taken, the marks of lashings across his back, the bruises that swelled his face. A wave of fury surged in her. She hated him, and yet she hated that anyone should become like this. He jerked away from her, trying to scramble backward. She said in a low voice, "Theon Greyjoy." He mumbled, "Reek? I'm Reek. I'm Reek." She said nothing for a moment, uncertain how to draw him out. She could see he was truly broken in his mind. This was the man who had once betrayed her family. Now the cruelty of the Boltons had hollowed him out. She whispered, "You were Theon Greyjoy, the ward of Eddard Stark." He flinched as if struck by a hot brand. No, not him. Reek. Arya swallowed. Would he even understand that she meant to help? But help him she would, at least despite the Boltons. She took a breath. "I am Arya Stark," she said softly. She paused. It felt strange to say those words aloud, to claim her name again so boldly. "I've come back to Winterfell." Theon's eyes lifted, watery and fearful. "The girl is dead," he muttered, trembling. "All of them are dead. The Starks." Ned Stark, Robb, all of them. Gone. Gone. I am here, she repeated, soft but firm. You swore fealty to my brother Robb once. You broke that vow, and you took Winterfell. She saw him flinch again, and part of her reveled in that guilt. But she continued, now I need you to help me. And I will help you. He stared at her with a gaunt, haunted look. For a moment, she doubted if he understood. But then she saw a tear roll down his cheek. He tried to turn away, but she grasped his chin gently. If you want to remain here and rot, that is your choice. But if you want to avenge any piece of what was done to you, what was done to my family and to you, then come with me. He blinked. He was trembling from more than cold, and he said nothing, only gave a small, shuddering nod. They left his cell behind. Arya half supported him, hooking an arm under his shoulders. He stumbled often. He was weak and malnourished, a staggering wreck. But her resolve was iron, and though she was smaller, she managed to guide him through the corridors. Each step felt fraught with danger. She expected Bolton men to leap from every corner. But the halls remained eerily empty. The hush pressed down on them, broken only by Theon's ragged breathing. The moment they returned to the upper yard, the cold wind hit them like a slap. He cowered at the open sky as if it frightened him. She hushed him, telling him to keep silent. They needed to find him something warmer to wear. Anything, or else he would freeze before they managed to leave Winterfell behind. At last, she spied the old armory with its door ajar. Inside, the racks of weapons and practice swords had been ransacked. The room was dim and dusty. She found a moth-eaten cloak discarded in a corner, along with a pair of battered boots that might fit Theon. She helped him slip his shaking feet inside. It was not ideal, but it might keep him from frostbite. Meanwhile, she rummaged for a decent blade. She found an old short sword, chipped along its edge. Not perfect, but better than nothing. She belted it at her waist, feeling a quiet satisfaction to be armed once more. When she turned back to Theon, he was crouched on the floor, hugging his knees, staring at her with a lost expression. If we do not leave soon, she told him firmly, we might never get out. He only stared for a moment, then slowly rose on unsteady legs. Arya nodded. They slipped out of the armory and crept toward the gates. The courtyard was deserted, though the gates themselves stood half-barricaded by fallen timbers. She began pushing them aside, mindful of every scrape and rattle. Theon, for his part, tried to help but seemed too weak to do more than feebly shift the lighter pieces. At last, they made a gap. They squeezed through, careful not to trip on the debris. Outside the walls, the snow drifted thicker, and the wind howled across the northern plains. The gloom of early evening was falling. She glanced back, gazing at the proud broken towers. Felt wrong, leaving Winterfell in ruins. But there was no choice. Maybe one day, she thought, she could return and reclaim it. Maybe they would rebuild. She turned away, forging on through the swirling snow, Theon's arms slung over her shoulders to steady him. They trudged away from Winterfell's walls, heading north, because heading south held no real promise. The Boltons had claimed the Dreadfort to the east, and farther south lay only Frey treachery. Arya did not trust any southern road. If anything, she thought perhaps her brother Jon might be somewhere at the wall, or that she could find some loyal bannermen who still revered the Stark name. Though the flayed man of House Bolton flew over the castles of the north, she refused to believe they had all forsaken her family's memory. Besides, it was rumored that not all men in the north bent the knee willingly to the Boltons. She decided to keep moving, to stay free, and to find any allies left in these frigid lands. Night came quickly. They found meager shelter in the remnants of a small crofter's cottage near a frozen stream. The roof still stood, though parts had collapsed. Arya cleared out a corner where the wind was weakest, and she started a small fire from gathered twigs. Outside, the wind whipped the snow into drifts. She gave Theon the last scraps of bread she had. He ate them without complaint, though tears rolled unbidden down his cheeks. She wondered if he was crying for joy at the taste of real food, or from shame that he had fallen so far as to accept scraps from a girl he had once looked down upon. She did not press him for answers. He fell asleep quickly, curled into himself. Arya sat by the fire, watchful. She had grown used to sleepless nights, feeling a blade beneath her cloak, ready for any threat. Yet her thoughts refused to be quiet. She kept recalling the moment she had found Theon in that black cell. She found herself trembling with a tangle of feelings, rage, pity, confusion. She recalled the day Theon had left with Robb to muster the northern banners, how her mother had always been wary of him, how her father had tried to treat him fairly, as a ward in name but a hostage in truth. And now here they were. Dawn brought a paler sky and they continued north. Theon trudged behind her, sometimes leaning on her for support. He said little. Occasionally he whispered about the bastard, obviously meaning Ramsay. She let him talk, though it unsettled her. She gleaned that Ramsay had forced him to hunt girls, to run in the forest at night. She learned that Theon had lost pieces of himself for every defiance. She learned he had endured horrors Arya did not want to imagine. And a small, gnawing voice in her mind said that maybe Theon deserved some of it for what he had done to her family. But no, this was too much. No one deserved that. She pressed her lips together and tried to push the thoughts aside. Now and then she also recalled the old rumors that Theon had murdered Bran and Rickon, her younger brothers. But she had heard from others in passing that he had not truly killed them, that the burnt corpses at Winterfell had belonged to 2 farm boys. Was that rumor or truth? Was that the reason she didn't simply stick a dagger in Theon's ribs and let his body freeze under the northern snows? She realized she had to know the truth. But it was still too raw to ask. She could barely think of them, Bran, Rickon, without feeling a sharp pang in her chest. They traveled in this uneasy companionship for days. The road was difficult, frequently hidden by fresh snow. They had to rely on Arya's sense of direction, gleaned from her childhood hunts in the Wolfswood. They avoided any villages for fear of encountering Bolton men or unscrupulous sellswords who might turn them in. Food was sparse. They subsisted on stale crusts and the occasional rabbit that Arya managed to snare. Theon rarely complained. When he spoke, it was often to murmur apologies, to mutter that he could go no farther, or to whimper about unseen terrors. She had to coax him again and again to keep moving, to keep living. Yet as the days passed, she saw flickers of something emerging in him, some small glimmer of the youth who had once lived among the Starks. When she needed help starting a fire, he showed her how to do it more efficiently. When she struggled to carry the kindling, he forced himself to gather some despite his wounds. Now and then she sensed he was ashamed, especially when she had to physically support him or when she hunted while he huddled near the meager warmth of embers. She guessed that shame might slowly sharpen him, remind him that he was still a man. On the 6th day after their escape from Winterfell, they came upon a frozen lake ringed by tall pines. The wind had slackened and the sky glowed pink with dawn. Arya paused at the edge of the lake, listening to the hush. She was exhausted, half-starved, and stinging from the cold, but she needed to find a way to cross. The lake looked solid enough, though she sensed a thinness in certain parts of the ice. Theon stood behind her, arms wrapped around himself. He asked, in a halting voice, "Why? Why are we going across?" "Because it's shorter," Arya said. "There's a game trail on the other side we can follow into the forests. If the Boltons or their men track us, they might not guess we went this way." Theon looked uncertain. "You're not afraid of the ice?" She shrugged, though her heart pounded. "I'm not afraid of anything," she said, and though it was bravado, she believed it for a moment. She started across the ice, her boots crunching softly. She tested each step. Theon followed at a distance of several paces. Once he nearly slipped but caught himself. For a moment, she recalled how she had once walked the courtyard's frozen puddles as a child with Bran, both of them giggling about who might slip first. She pressed her lips together, chasing the memory away. Suddenly she heard a crack beneath her feet. She froze. Theon also halted. Slowly, carefully, she shuffled her weight back, feeling the ice threaten to give. She realized the center of the lake might be thinner. She beckoned Theon to edge around her, moving closer to the line of pine trees on the side. Step by step, they made their way around that fragile spot, their breath hitching whenever the ice groaned in protest. They reached the far bank without disaster. Arya let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Theon collapsed onto a log, exhaling. Shakily, she glanced around, scanning the tree line for any sign of watchers. No one. The vast northern wilderness was as silent as the grave, save for the wind in the pines. They pressed on. The forest swallowed them, the snowdrifts rising to Arya's calves. She tripped often, cursing under her breath, but each time Theon or she would catch the other. They spoke little, saving their energies. At last, around midday, they found a small clearing with a half-crumbled stone structure that might once have been a watchtower or a wayside shrine. It offered partial shelter from the wind. They ducked inside, found a corner shielded from the elements, and settled down. Arya massaged her numbed fingers. She looked at Theon, who seemed on the verge of collapsing. She said, "We'll rest here. I'll try to find us something to eat." He nodded weakly. She ventured outside, scanning the snow for tracks. She found a faint trail, possibly a hare, and followed it, ears pricked for any movement. She didn't have a bow, so she'd rely on her snares or her short sword if she managed to get close. She crouched near a fallen log and did her best to set a simple snare with a length of twine. Quietly, she waited, letting time stretch. She remembered old lessons. How quiet you had to be, how patient. By the time she returned, she had managed to snag a scrawny hare that wandered right into the snare. She felt a small flush of triumph. It wasn't much, but it would be meat in their bellies for once. She skinned and gutted it outside, as her father once taught her, and then she returned to the ruin. Theon looked at the carcass with a dull hunger in his eyes. Arya gathered what bits of wood she could find, some charred remains of old timber from the structure. She sparked a fire, spitted the hare on a rough branch. As the smell of roasting meat filled the air, Theon stared at the flames. She said nothing. Eventually, he broke the silence with a trembling voice. "I did not kill them," he whispered. "Your brothers, Bran and Rickon. I tried to find them, but they had vanished with Hodder and the wildling woman. They left me no choice. My men, we killed 2 farm boys instead. Burned their bodies. Made people think it was them." Arya looked at him, her heart pounding at the mention of her brothers. The relief, Bran and Rickon alive, warred with the fury that he had murdered 2 innocents and tried to pass them off as her siblings. She did not speak, afraid her voice might crack. Theon gazed down at his broken hands. "I wanted to frighten the North too." He laughed bitterly, the sound raw. "I thought I was clever, a true Ironborn. Proved to my father I was a real son of the Iron Islands. But I was a fool." He closed his eyes, tears glinting. "And I paid for it in blood. Ramsay, he took everything from me." Arya felt the swirl of emotions rising in her. Part of her wanted to lash out, to strike him. But another part recognized that he had done something monstrous but had not actually murdered her brothers. That strange relief mingled with her sorrow for the farm boys, for all the havoc that Theon's arrogance had unleashed. She stared at him, at his sunken cheeks and haunted eyes. She forced her voice to remain steady. "I never believed it," she lied, though she'd had her doubts and fears. "I believed my brothers still lived." He nodded slowly. "I hope they are safe," he murmured, an odd echo of his old self who might have cared for them once upon a time. "Do you know where they are?" She shook her head. "No." She was silent a moment, then said, "I'm sorry for what he did to you, Ramsay. But you've done terrible things too, Theon." She paused. "If you truly want to make amends, help me. Help me reclaim the North for my family, if that's even possible." She felt the enormity of the words as she spoke them. She was just a girl, half-starved, trying to flee the Boltons. But she had to believe in something. Theon stared into the fire. He nodded slowly, though his eyes were wet with tears. Arya reached over to rotate the hare, letting it cook more evenly. They did not speak further, but in that moment she sensed a shifting in the air, some nascent alliance, or at least an understanding. They ate the roasted hare in silence, dividing it equally despite Theon's attempts to let her have more. She insisted that he needed the strength to travel. He might have to fight someday. Afterward, they banked the fire with snow and settled against the cold stones, trying to keep warm. She found herself drifting off, exhausted from their days of trudging. The wind whispered beyond the broken walls. She jolted awake sometime later, uncertain how long she had slept. Theon was shaking her urgently. His eyes were wide. "Footsteps," he hissed. "I heard something outside." Arya came alert. She grabbed her short sword, muscles tensed. They listened. Yes, outside, crunching on the snow, and low voices too, maybe 3 men. She felt her heart hammer in her chest. Were they Bolton men? Or perhaps bandits? Either way, she didn't relish the odds. She and Theon were exhausted, and Theon was hardly in condition to fight. She flicked a gesture for Theon to stay silent. He nodded, huddling behind a collapsed section of wall. Arya crept to a gap in the stone that overlooked the clearing. She saw them, 3 figures cloaked in dark fur, picking their way among the snowdrifts. One carried a spear, another a bow, the third had an axe slung across his back. They looked like hunters or sellswords. One pointed at the ruins, motioning the others to approach. Arya's blood iced. She ducked down, considering their options. If these men had no loyalty to House Stark, they might try to rob or kill them. If they were Bolton men, it was even worse. She touched Theon's arm gently, leaned close, and whispered, "If they find us, we fight or run?" He licked his lips, fear bright in his eyes. "We are too weak to run far." He gestured to the ruin as if to say this was their only shelter. She nodded grimly. The men were coming closer, their voices echoing. "Might be shelter in there," one said. "We can wait out the wind, build a fire." "We have no time," another grumbled. "We need to keep searching." "For what?" the spearholder asked. "We lost their trail days ago. If they froze to death, we'll never find them." Arya stiffened. They were searching for her and Theon, no doubt. The bastard's huntsman. She wanted to curse. She heard the third man say, "Lord Ramsay doesn't care. He wants them found. That's all that matters." Theon grabbed her hand, trembling. She nodded in determination. These men would kill them or worse. She scanned the small interior for any vantage. If the men came in, the element of surprise was their best chance. They could attempt to slip out the back, but there was no real back exit, only a jagged hole that looked out onto an open field of snow. They'd be seen. She raised the short sword, testing her grip. She whispered, "Stay low. I'll take the first. Try to help if you can." Theon's breath hitched. She wasn't even sure if he knew how to fight anymore in his state, but they had no choice. She crouched behind the fallen stones, heart thudding. The men's footsteps crunched nearer. One of them called, "We'll check inside. Might be some leftover supplies, or at least a place to piss out of the wind." Their shadows stretched across the broken threshold. Arya saw a pair of boots step over the rubble. She couldn't breathe for a moment. Then another set of footsteps. The first man let out a grunt, turning toward where she and Theon crouched. His eyes widened. Arya lunged. She sprang from her crouch, short sword leading. The man tried to parry with his spear, but she twisted aside with a nimble shift of her feet, remembering Sirio's lessons, letting his spear's point miss her by a hair. She drove her blade upward into his gut, teeth clenched. He gasped, red spittle on his lips. The second man shouted, fumbling for his axe. Theon lurched at him with a ragged yell, trying to grab the axe or hamper him. The man swung wildly, knocking Theon to the ground. Theon let out a cry, but he kept hold of the man's arm, dragging him down. Arya saw the confusion in the man's eyes as he tried to free himself. She spun around, ripped her blade free from the first man, and leapt onto the second, plunging her sword into his side. He howled. From the doorway came a twang of a bowstring. Arya barely had time to react. An arrow streaked past her, clattering against the stones. The archer stood outside, scrambling to notch another arrow. She ducked behind a broken section of wall. Theon tried to crawl aside, but was pinned under the dying man's weight. She looked around frantically. Could she circle outside somehow, or find a vantage? Another arrow sliced overhead, lodging in a timber. "Seven hells," she cursed under her breath. She scrambled, pressing herself against the wall. The floor was slick with blood from the two men. The first was clearly dead, his spear fallen from limp fingers. The second man was choking, blood bubbling at his lips. Theon struggled to push him off, but only managed to shift him slightly. A voice from outside shouted, "Coward. Come out and die clean. Lord Ramsay wants you alive, but I'll settle for your corpses." Another arrow whistled, ricocheting off stone. Arya realized they were pinned down. The ruin offered a momentary shield, but eventually the archer could maneuver for a better angle. Then she glanced at the spear lying across the floor. She snatched it up, breathing fast. It was heavier than she liked, but she had no time to fuss. She steadied her grip, easing to the edge of the collapsed wall. She spied the archer creeping closer, bow half-drawn. Summoning all the strength she had, she hurled the spear. It spun through the air and struck the archer's shoulder, deflecting slightly but knocking him off balance. He cried out, dropping the bow. Arya sprinted forward, charging him before he could recover. He fumbled for a dagger, cursing. She feinted, shifting her weight to one side, and then slid her short sword across his throat. He gurgled and collapsed in the snow, crimson staining the white drifts. She stood there, panting, the cold air searing her lungs. She listened for any more attackers. Silence, save for Theon's ragged breathing from inside the ruin. She hurried back in. The second man had expired, and Theon managed to roll him off. Theon grimaced, panting. "You," he began, then let out a shaking breath. "You're not the little girl I remember." Arya grimly wiped the blood from her blade on a scrap of cloth. "No," she said softly. "I'm not." She checked Theon for wounds. He had a shallow cut on his shoulder from the man's axe, but it did not seem life-threatening. She tore a piece of cloth from the dead man's tunic and pressed it to the wound to staunch the bleeding. He hissed, but did not pull away. They needed to leave now. The men might have had more companions nearby. Quickly, Arya searched the bodies for anything useful. She found a small pouch of dried meat and a flask of water. One carried a handful of coins with the sigil of House Bolton minted on them. Another wore a heavier cloak in better condition, which she stripped off. She tossed it to Theon. "Wear this. You'll freeze otherwise." He obeyed, though he trembled with shock. She also retrieved the bow and quiver from the archer, checking the tension on the bowstring. It was serviceable with a half-dozen arrows. That would help if they ran into more trouble. They departed the ruin, leaving the corpses behind. Theon's feet dragged through the snow, and the faint rustle of pine needles overhead provided a disquieting hush. Now she was certain the bastard of Bolton was actively hunting them. They had to slip through his net, vanish into the wilderness. Maybe they could circle around, find the last hearth or some other stronghold where the Umbers might still be loyal to House Stark. Arya vaguely remembered that the Umbers had once been staunch supporters. But had they bent the knee to the Boltons? So much had changed. They trudged on. The day passed in a blur of cold and hunger, but at least the dried meat gave them a small boost of strength. Twice, Arya paused to let Theon catch his breath, scanning the horizon for any sign of riders. None came. The setting sun painted the sky in streaks of red and purple, and the temperature plummeted. They found a shallow cave near a rocky outcrop, decided it would have to suffice. Arya cleared a space for a fire. She told Theon to rest while she gathered wood. Returning with a bundle of sticks, she saw Theon hunched near the cave wall, arms around his knees, eyes unfocused. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. He flinched but relaxed when he realized it was her. She busied herself striking a spark onto tinder. Gradually, flames licked up around the small branches, casting flickering light on the cave walls. He stared into the fire, face drawn. After a long silence, he said, "I do want to make amends, you know. Not just out of fear or guilt." She nodded slowly, not sure how to respond. She recalled him teaching Bran how to aim a bow once, remembered how he had teased them both. She remembered how swiftly he had turned on them. She bit her lip. "We'll see if you get the chance," she said at last. "We're both wanted by the Boltons. Right now, survival is all that matters." But one day, she glanced at him, letting the words hang. He bowed his head. The fire crackled. She dozed off and on throughout the night, haunted by images of the men she had killed in the ruin. She had killed before, but each time it left her mind buzzing with adrenaline and regret. There was no choice, she reminded herself. If she hadn't, they would have dragged her and Theon back to Ramsay. She clenched her fists. The night passed slowly, with the wind outside howling through the pines. When morning came, Theon's wound looked ugly, but at least it had not festered. She used some melted snow to clean it, binding it with rags. He winced, though he tried to hide his pain. They continued their trek north, each day a struggle. Arya used the new bow to hunt small game, squirrels, another hare, even a half-starved fox that strayed too close. It wasn't pleasant to kill such creatures, but they needed meat. Theon tried to help, but his aim was shaky and she suspected his fingers ached from old injuries. Still, she saw how he watched her with something like respect. Perhaps it was the first time in his life he realized that Arya Stark could be formidable. Their journey led them deeper into forests thick with fir and pine. Each morning, they rose stiff-limbed, half-frozen, but determined to keep going. They followed half-buried tracks that wound around rocky hills and icy streams. Now and then, they spotted old hunting cabins or abandoned holdfasts. Most were empty, pillaged by roaming soldiers or scarce inhabitants. They scrounged what they could. Days bled into weeks. Theon grew a little stronger, though he still bore the marks of his captivity. Sometimes he woke screaming from nightmares, calling for someone to stop hurting him. Arya would clamp a hand over his mouth, hushing him, reminding him that they had to stay quiet. They encountered no more Bolton hunters. Possibly Ramsay's men had returned to the Drevfort, thinking Theon and Arya must surely be dead from exposure. Or maybe they were still out there, scouring the woods in vain. In either case, Arya remained cautious. She had learned to stay out of sight, to travel in the gullies where the pines were thickest. She kept an arrow always near at hand, scanning for danger. As the days passed, a fragile trust began to form between them. Theon spoke occasionally about the guilt he carried. He told her how he had once truly admired Robb Stark, seeing him as both brother and friend. He admitted that he had always felt torn between the Iron Islands and the North, that his father had scorned him for being too tame. Arya listened, sometimes scowling, but she heard the earnestness in his words. She could see in him a spark of remorse. She wondered if saving Theon's life might change something in this bloody conflict. He had been a traitor, but now he was also a man with inside knowledge of the Boltons, of their methods. He knew the layout of the Drefort, the names of their men, perhaps some secrets. If they found any loyal Northmen, Theon's knowledge might be invaluable. Yet she also knew the North might despise him for betraying them, for capturing Winterfell. Winning them over would be no simple feat. She pondered it silently as they trudged on, hoping they would stumble across some settlement or minor lord still loyal to House Stark. Finally, after nearly 3 weeks on the move, they found themselves at the edge of a wide valley ringed by low hills. From a vantage point atop a rocky outcropping, Arya peered down at a cluster of buildings hugging the banks of a half-frozen river. Smoke rose from a handful of chimneys. The settlement looked modest, a small town or large village. She saw no banner flying above it. She turned to Theon. "We need to decide if we dare go in. We're low on supplies again. But if they're under Bolton rule..." He nodded, swallowing. "Perhaps we scout it from afar. See if they have men at arms. I can't imagine it's heavily garrisoned. It's too small." Arya squinted down at the cluster of roofs. She saw a few figures moving about in the streets, some men carrying logs, a woman leading a donkey. "If we do go in, we keep our heads down. Don't draw attention. Maybe trade what little we have for fresh provisions." She tapped the hilt of her sword. "We can't be recognized, especially not you. I doubt anyone would know my face, not like this," he said bitterly, gesturing at the scars and the missing fingers. "But I'll hide beneath my hood all the same." They descended cautiously, picking a path through the snowy hillside. As they neared the village, they observed its small wooden palisade, more for keeping out wolves than an invading army. The gate was open, with a single watchman half-dozing by a brazier of coals. No sigil on his cloak. Arya dipped her head, pulling her hood low. Theon did the same. They passed the watchman without challenge. Inside, the streets were narrow, slushy with melting snow. Timber houses lined either side, smoke drifting from peat fires. A few villagers cast curious glances at the strangers, but no one approached. Arya's stomach rumbled at the scent of baking bread. Beside her, Theon hobbled on, leaning slightly on a walking stick he had cut from a branch. A broad-shouldered blacksmith was hammering away at a piece of iron in his open-air forge, the clang echoing through the chill air. A couple of children splashed in a muddy puddle, ignoring the cold. It was a small slice of normalcy that made Arya's heart ache with longing for simpler days. They found a modest inn near the center of the village, with a battered sign depicting a crescent moon. She led Theon inside. The common room was smoky, warmed by a large hearth. A few men drank ale at a corner table, speaking in low voices. Behind the counter stood an older woman with silvered hair tied in a braid. She eyed them warily. "You want a room?" she asked. Arya glanced at Theon, then back at the woman. "We have a little coin," she said. "We just need a place to rest, maybe a meal." The woman nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. Well, I'll not turn away coin. I've a small room in the back for a handful of coppers. Stew is extra." Arya dug out the coins she had taken from the Bolton men. She placed a few on the counter. The woman's eyes flicked to them. "Valyrian steel, these coins," she said, "are easing a brow. You're a long way from anywhere that mints that." Arya's mouth went dry. "We found them on the road," she lied. "Scavenged." She tried to keep her tone even. The woman shrugged. "I don't care where you got 'em as long as they're good." She scooped them up. "Room's yours for the night. We've got bread and stew. 2 bowls?" Arya nodded. Theon stood silent, hood pulled low. They took a seat at a small table near the hearth, warmth washing over their cold limbs. Arya could have wept at the comfort. The stew arrived, thin but hot, with a few bits of carrot and onion floating in it, along with chewy lumps of meat. She devoured it, Theon following suit, though he struggled to hold the spoon with his damaged hands. She helped him discreetly, neither of them wanting to draw attention. After they finished, Arya felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, relative safety. She scanned the room. The men at the corner table seemed to be local villagers, hunched over their cups. One was complaining about wolves in the hills, another about not having enough fodder for the livestock. The older woman who ran the inn was busy tidying up. No sign of soldiers, no mention of Boltons. Arya dared to hope they might pass unnoticed here. She murmured to Theon, "We'll rest a bit, then go to our room." He nodded. She could see relief in his posture, but also fear that at any moment someone might burst in demanding their heads. As the evening wore on, the inn slowly filled with a few more patrons, mostly locals. They drank, talked, complained about the cold. Arya overheard a snippet of conversation, heard from a traveler that trouble's brewing in the west. "The Boltons are losing favor with some of their bannermen. Seems the bastard's cruelty has turned many hearts." The man's companion shrugged, replying that it was none of their concern. Arya listened keenly, heart racing. If the Boltons were losing support, that might be the opening the Starks needed, if any Starks remained. She and Theon were only two people half-starved. But if they could connect with men of the north who opposed the Boltons. The idea lingered in her mind, both thrilling and terrifying. At last, they retired to their room, which was barely large enough for a pallet and a small chest. But it was private and the door had a latch. Once inside, Theon collapsed onto the pallet with a groan. Arya slid down against the wall, hugging her knees. She rubbed her tired eyes. He spoke softly, voice raspy. If the Boltons lose favor, that might mean the north is stirring. The old families might be ready to cast them down. She nodded, recalling the rumors. We need to find them. The Manderleys, the Glovers, the Umbers, someone. Convince them that the Starks still live. She felt a lump in her throat. We can't do it alone. He managed a crooked smile. You sound like Robb. She frowned. Don't compare me to him. He lowered his gaze. I'm sorry. I only meant. You have that same determination. Arya sighed. I'm not a leader, but I'll do what I must. She studied his face, the lines of pain etched into it. If I can muster any of them, do you swear you'll stand with me against the Boltons? Even if they name you traitor. He inhaled unsteadily. I swear it, on whatever honor I have left. I swore to Robb once, and I broke that oath. But no more. I have nothing else. She believed him. Maybe she was a fool for it. But a strange sense of trust had sprung between them on this desperate journey. She nodded, letting her exhaustion take hold. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, and the inn's muffled noises lulled her into an uneasy sleep. They set out again the next morning, after purchasing some basic supplies from the innkeeper. A bit of salted pork, hard bread, a flask of watered ale. The roads leading north from the village were little more than rutted paths. They parted ways with the villagers, none of whom seemed sorry to see them go. Over the following days, they pressed deeper into the wilderness, crossing frozen creeks, skirting the edges of a wide, snowbound plain. They passed occasional farmsteads, mostly abandoned or inhabited by wary folk who eyed them suspiciously. But no one tried to stop them. Eventually, on a biting cold morning, they saw the outline of a wooden stronghold perched on a rise. The structure was ringed by a stout palisade, beyond which rose a blocky keep of gray stone. A battered banner hung from a pole above the gatehouse, though the wind whipped it too fiercely for Arya to see the crest. Heart pounding, she crept closer, Theon in tow. From a sheltered vantage point behind some brush, she peered at the banner, waiting for the wind to momentarily slacken. It unfurled briefly, revealing the image of a roaring giant, chains broken around his wrists, the sigil of House Umber. Arya felt her breath catch. The Umbers had been among the Starks' oldest and strongest allies, but she recalled hearing that the great Jon Umber had gone south with Robb. Rumors placed him in Frey captivity after the Red Wedding. She was unsure who ruled Last Hearth now or if that rule might favor the Boltons. They debated for a time. Theon said, if the Umbers are loyal to the Boltons, they'll hand us over. Arya frowned. We can't just keep wandering. We need allies. This might be our best chance. She drew a breath. I'll go. You wait here. If they try to seize me, you'll know. He shook his head vigorously. I won't let you go alone, Arya. If they take you, I won't fare any better here. A small warmth spread in her chest that he was willing to stand beside her despite everything. She closed her eyes a moment, deciding, all right, we go together. They approached openly, hoods up. The gates were guarded by a half-dozen men in furs and mail. One stepped forward, hand on his sword hilt, calling out, halt! Who goes there? Arya swallowed, lifting her face. I am Arya Stark of Winterfell, daughter of Lord Eddard Stark. I seek shelter and an audience. The men stared incredulous. One let out a short laugh. Arya Stark is dead, lass. The Starks are all dead and gone. She lifted her chin, forcing steel into her voice. Clearly not. Let me speak to your commander. If you truly follow House Umber, you must at least grant me that. The Umbers have been loyal to House Stark for generations. The guards shifted uncomfortably. At length, one said, stay here. I'll fetch the castellan. They waited under the watchful gaze of the other guards. Arya could feel them sizing her up, glancing at Theon suspiciously. She forced herself to remain calm, shoulders back, posture straight, as her mother might have done when addressing those beneath her station. Theon stood beside her, lowering his gaze, as if ashamed to meet their eyes. After several tense minutes, the gate creaked open further. An older man with gray-streaked hair emerged, wearing a thick fur cloak and a breastplate emblazoned with the Umber Giant. He surveyed Arya and Theon with a stern expression. "They say you name yourself Arya Stark," he said bluntly. "But the Boltons claim the Stark girls are long dead. Could you be just another pretender hoping to rile the North?" Arya met his gaze. "I remember you," she said slowly, searching her memory. "You were called Howdan. You served under the Great John as his master of horse. At Winterfell once, you drank too much spiced wine and fell asleep in the stables, and my brother Robb teased you about it the next day." He blinked, surprise flickering across his face. He cleared his throat. That happened. The Great John had a laugh at my expense for weeks." He studied her face closely. "Gods be good. You have the look of Lady Catelyn. The eyes, though, those are Lord Eddard's." Arya's throat tightened. "Yes, it's me. I survived." The man exhaled, glancing at Theon. "Then who's this, if I might ask?" "He looks half dead." Arya squared her shoulders. "Theon Greyjoy." She heard the sharp intake of breath from several guards, saw them shift with anger. The Castellan's brows rose. She pressed on before they could react violently. "Yes, he betrayed my family, but that was then. He was taken and tortured by Ramsay Bolton. I freed him from Winterfell. We are here seeking refuge and to see if the Umbers still stand with the Starks against the Boltons." A tense silence followed. The guards looked at each other, some gripping their swords. Theon lowered his head as if awaiting a blow. But the Castellan narrowed his eyes, and at length he said, "We keep the Greyjoy's memory here, though he's gone, likely dead or rotting in Frey dungeons. The new lord is a boy, the Greyjoy's nephew. But we hold out as best we can. The Boltons demand our fealty, but we have not bent the knee. We feign half cooperation, but we do not trust them, especially the bastard." Arya's heart leapt with hope. "Then let us in. Give us shelter. I promise you, in the name of my father, that we will repay you. The Boltons are tyrants. We have to unite the North against them." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Come inside. We will treat with you. But that 1 inch," he jerked his chin at Theon, "will need to be watched closely. There are men here who lost kin when he took Winterfell." Arya nodded, relief mingled with dread. "I understand." The Castellan motioned, and the guards parted. The gates swung open, revealing the courtyard of the keep. Arya stepped through with Theon at her side, heart pounding, realizing that their fate hinged on the Umbers' decision to aid them or cast them out. But for the first time since she had fled King's Landing, she felt a spark of genuine hope. The Castellan escorted them through the gate and into the courtyard. Towering wooden walls creaked in the wind, and beyond them stood the squat bulk of a northern keep. The yard was half buried in snow, and men in heavy cloaks moved between stables and storage sheds, tending to horses or hauling sacks of grain. Many paused to stare at Arya and Theon as they passed. Eyes narrowed when they recognized Theon's features or the telltale scars that marked him as a tormented prisoner. Arya swallowed against the tension, remembering that the Umbers had been among the fiercest of the Stark loyalists. Their losses under Theon's betrayal would not be easily forgiven. Still, the Castellan led them onward without protest, up a short set of stone steps and through the keep's heavy oak doors. Inside, the walls of the entry hall were lined with mounted animal heads, bears, elk, even the skull of a giant boar. The flicker of torches cast the trophies in shifting shadows. The air smelled of pine resin, smoke, and old varnish. A pair of guards flanked an inner door that led, presumably, to the main hall. The Castellan gave a nod and the guards stood aside. They emerged into a broad hall with a high-timbered roof. A long trestle table stood near the center, though there was no feast today, only a few men huddled around the hearth, speaking in low voices. At the far end, on a raised dais, was a seat carved of dark wood. Seated there was a boy of perhaps 14 or 15, draped in a cloak of wolf fur much too large for him. His hair was a tousle of brown curls, and his chin still bore the softness of youth, though his expression was grim. 2 older men stood flanking him, dressed in the rough-spun but serviceable garments of northern retainers. They looked on as Arya and Theon approached. The Castellan stepped forward and bowed with a hand to his chest. "My lord, I present Arya Stark of Winterfell and Theon Greyjoy. She claims to have rescued Greyjoy from the bastard of Bolton. She also claims to be Lord Eddard Stark's daughter." The boy's gaze snapped onto Arya. He rose, pushing the cloak back from his shoulders, and descended the short steps. His posture was stiff, uncertain whether to greet her kindly or treat her as an impostor. He stopped a few paces away, lifting his chin. I am Hother Umber, he said, voice wavering for a moment, then settling. Though men call me the Smallgen's son. My father died in the south with Robb Stark, if you believe the Fryfilth. My great-uncle was the Great Jon. He was taken at the Twins. I've ruled here, or tried to ever since. Arya met his gaze. She remembered the Great Jon as a giant of a man who roared with laughter, drank like a fish, and once famously lost 2 fingers to Grey Wind before proclaiming Robb the king in the north. She felt a pang of sadness that so many good men had perished. I remember your father, my lord, she said gently. He fought bravely with Robb. He was always kind to us children in Winterfell. I'm sorry for what happened. She paused, the enormity of it all settling over her. I am Arya, truly. I fled King's Landing after my father was executed, wandered through half the 7 kingdoms, and I've only just now returned to the north. She saw him search her face. She wondered if she looked anything like the girl she had once been. She felt older, sharpened by bitterness and loss. But perhaps there were still remnants of the Stark features that might reassure him. And that one, Hotha said, gesturing to Theon with unmasked suspicion, is the turncloak who seized Winterfell. I heard he killed 2 children, claiming they were your brothers. He deserved every torment Ramsay gave him. Arya tensed. She felt Theon flinch beside her. She said, he did terrible things, but he did not kill my brothers. They escaped. Theon hunted 2 orphan boys instead. He lied, claiming they were Bran and Rickon. It was monstrous, I know, but he's paid dearly since. He was flayed, mutilated. I found him rotting in a dungeon, more a beast than a man. He helped me escape Winterfell, and now he wants to atone. She hesitated, glancing at Theon. He's the only one I have left in all this. I ask that you not kill him outright if you still believe in House Stark. The boy lord studied her with a flicker of empathy. Then he pressed his lips together, turning his sharp gaze on Theon. I can't say I wouldn't like to kill you. My father marched with Robb Stark and you cost us Winterfell. You cast the whole north into disarray. But he exhaled, glancing at Arya again. If Arya Stark vouches for your life, I won't spill your blood in my hall. But don't think you'll walk freely here. You'll remain under guard. Theon bowed his head, swallowing. I understand. Thank you. Hother's posture seemed to relax a fraction. He motioned for them to approach the hearth where the older men had risen to watch. The Castellan and the 2 men took up positions at Hother's side, protective but not openly hostile. Arya tried to remember the long years when Umbers and Starks had stood side by side. How the Great Jon had been the first to proclaim Robb as king in the north. They had a legacy of loyalty. She prayed that loyalty might still burn in these uncertain times. They gathered around the fire, which blazed with fresh logs, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. The warmth seeped into Arya's numb fingers. Theon stood at a respectful distance, shoulders hunched. Hother glanced at one of the retainers, a lean man with graying whiskers. Bring ale and bread for our guests. Then he turned back to Arya. Tell me everything that's happened to you. The last we heard, the younger Stark girls were lost after Ned Stark's death. Sansa was rumored to be betrothed to the Imp, or to the Lannisters, or was it the Tyrells? The rumors travel so slowly here. Some said you were dead. Others said you were in Bravos, half a world away. Arya told him a version of her tale, cautious not to reveal too many of her darkest experiences. She admitted that she'd fled King's Landing with Yoren of the Night's Watch, that she'd traveled disguised as a boy for a time, that she'd been captured and taken to Harrenhal before escaping. She told them she had roamed the Riverlands, though she didn't speak of the faces she'd worn or the kill list she recited at night. Then she explained that she'd come north upon hearing Winterfell was in turmoil, only to find it ruined and the Boltons in control. She told him how she discovered Theon imprisoned and, on a desperate impulse, chose to free him and flee. She wanted to omit nothing that might convince the Umbers she was truly a Stark who had endured hardships worthy of the North. When she finished, the retainer with whiskers had returned with a pitcher of ale and a loaf of coarse bread. The bread was placed on a wooden platter near the hearth. Arya, her mouth dry from speaking, took a cup and sipped the ale gratefully. Hother listened in silence, face grave. When she finished, he said, "Gods, we always heard the rumors, but it's another thing to hear it from your own lips. If you truly are Arya Stark, then you have the right to call on our loyalty." The retainer with whiskers spoke up, voice raspy. "We want to be certain. With things as they are, a pretender could cost us our lives. Do you carry anything to prove your claim?" Arya reached into her travel pouch, not expecting to find much. She had lost and discarded many items along her journey. But she did pull out the small folded note on stiff parchment, one bearing the direwolf sigil from years ago. It had once been a letter from her mother, left behind in her baggage at Harrenhal. She'd managed to keep it through countless hardships. The ink was faded, the words barely legible, but the direwolf crest was still visible. She offered it. "That's from my mother, Lady Catelyn," she said. "You can see her signature, though it's half-faded." The castellan and the whiskered retainer examined it closely, exchanging glances. Hother hovered over them, biting his lip. At length the castellan nodded. "That is Lady Catelyn's hand. I remember it from old correspondences." Hother leaned back, relief warring with awe. "Then it's settled. If anyone is truly Arya Stark, it is you." He let out a breath, then looked about at his men. "We have the daughter of Eddard Stark in our hall. We have a chance to strike back at the flayed man." The men exchanged uneasy glances. One said, "We might fight, but with so few men left, and the great Jon gone, do we even stand a chance? The Boltons have the Dreadfort and the Freys as allies, and they've seized Winterfell. If we rise up openly, they could march on us." Hother's eyes flicked to Arya. "What say you, my lady? Do we wait and endure, or do we strike? One call to arms, and I can muster maybe 300 fighting men. Perhaps a bit more if we press all the farmsteads. Is that enough to stand against Roose Bolton? Unlikely, but maybe if we can rally other houses. The Glovers might join us. The Serwyns were always loyal to House Stark, but the Boltons have threatened them. The Manderleys sit in White Harbor, yet there are rumors Lord Wyman is none too fond of the flayed man. We need more than a single house if we want to dethrone the Boltons and reclaim Winterfell." Arya absorbed his words, her heart pounding. Once, she would have never imagined herself in a position to plan alliances and warfare. That was Robb's realm or her father's, but both were gone. "We do need allies," she agreed. "If you rise alone, the Boltons will crush you. We have to gather support from all who remain true to House Stark." A slow nod went around the circle of men. The whiskered retainer said, "Well, the Boltons can't watch every road. If we send ravens, though, they might intercept them. We might have to travel in person, or dispatch riders we trust." Hother frowned, glancing at Theon. "You said he was tortured at the Dreadfort and at Winterfell. Does he know anything that might help us slip past their watch, or find a weakness?" Arya turned to Theon, who raised his head wide. Uncertainty. He looked from face to face, seeing the barely concealed hostility in the Umber men. Still, he spoke in a subdued voice. "I know some of Ramsay's troop movements. He keeps small bands of huntsmen with hounds, often patrolling the roads. He trusts them more than large garrisons because he likes to keep men guessing. He's also savage with any house that shows defiance. But many fear and hate him. If you can offer them a better choice, perhaps they'll cast him aside. As for the Dreadfort itself, I only know the broad layout. I was a prisoner, not a guest. But I recall hearing that the Boltons have trouble keeping the mountain clans in check. Those wild men in the high passes, some might join you if you treat with them." Hother tapped a finger to his jaw. "Aye, the mountain clans. My father once joked they'd be formidable allies if we could stomach their ways. They follow their own rules, but they loathe southern oppression. If House Stark can promise them fair treatment, they might muster a few hundred warriors. I'd not trust them to hold a castle, but they can raid the Bolton supply lines and hamper their outriders." He looked at Arya, letting the words sink in. "We have choices to make, my lady." She let out a shaky breath. "I need to send word to any friendly houses. I also need to find out if my brother Jon is still at the Wall, or if he's become Lord Commander. There were rumors about that. The Night's Watch is sworn to neutrality, but Jon is still a Stark by blood. Maybe he'd help us, though that might break his vows." Her brow furrowed. "One step at a time. If we can gather enough discontented houses, we might retake Winterfell. Then, with that seat reclaimed, men might flock to our banner. Even if we can't best the Boltons outright, we can chip away at their hold." Hother glanced around at his men. Some nodded in cautious agreement. Others looked grim, perhaps recalling the carnage of the Red Wedding or the devastation the North had already suffered. But the boy lord set his jaw. "We are Umber. We remember oaths. I'll not kneel to the bastard or to any who flay their enemies." We'll stand with you if you are truly the Stark in Winterfell. Arya felt a surge of gratitude. Then I accept your help. We'll do this carefully. We can send discreet envoys to the mountain clans, to the Glovers, to White Harbor if we're bold enough. Meanwhile, we must keep a low profile. The Boltons are hunting me and Theon. If they learn we've holed up with you, they may attack. Hother allowed himself a small, defiant smile. Let them try. The walls of Last Hearth are thick and the men are loyal. We'll make them pay for every breach. Though God's grant it doesn't come to open siege before we can rally the rest. Thus the plan was set in motion. Over the next days, Arya saw how swiftly the Umbers organized. Hother commanded respect despite his youth. Perhaps because he was the Greyjoy's blood, or perhaps because the men sensed a fierce resolve in him. Trusting no raven, he handpicked a handful of riders to bear secret messages north and south, each carrying letters in Arya's name and in the name of House Umber. Though the roads were dangerous, especially with Bolton patrols, these riders were hardened northerners who knew the old byways. Another party was sent into the mountains to treat with the clan chiefs, offering them fair trade and autonomy in exchange for their swords. At the same time, Hother quietly recalled some of the Umber men scattered in distant hamlets, instructing them to muster at Last Hearth. He did not announce open rebellion, only a precautionary gathering so as not to tip off any spies. Arya spent her days in uneasy anticipation, longing to do more but unsure how to proceed. She practiced sword work in the courtyard, ignoring the watchful stares of the Umbers who were unaccustomed to seeing a highborn girl wield a blade with such determination. She found an archery range behind the stables and honed her aim with the bow she had taken from the Bolton huntsman. Sometimes Hother joined her, curious about her skill. She recognized that he admired her but was also still uncertain about the weight of responsibility he carried. By evening, she was exhausted, haunted by nightmares of Ramsay's men or half-remembered horrors from her journeys. Theon was kept under guard, albeit not in a cell. He slept in a small chamber near the barracks. 2 men watched him at all times. Yet Arya noticed that as the days passed, his guards grew less hostile. He offered no trouble, spoke politely, even tried to help with small tasks. His gratitude toward Arya was evident in every glance, and though many Umbers hissed under their breath when they saw him, no open violence erupted. Arya sometimes visited him, bringing food or news. He would rise from his pallet, looking wan but determined, and ask if there was any role he could play. She told him to rest, that soon his knowledge of the Dread Fort might be invaluable. After nearly 2 weeks, the first messenger returned. He was a grizzled ranger named Lon, who had gone to treat with the mountain clans. He arrived one icy morning, half-frozen, leading a lathered horse. Arya and Hother hurried to the gatehouse to greet him. He dismounted stiffly, then nodded at them both. They'll meet. The clan chiefs want to see you in person, my lord, or the Stark girl if they're to commit men. The Stonecrows and the Burned men, strange folk, but they despise the Boltons. If you go to their high valley with some small escort, they might declare for you. Hother rubbed his chin. Well, it's a risk, traveling so far into the mountains. But if they bring a few hundred fighters, that could be the difference between success and failure. We can't ignore it. Arya said, I'll go. It might mean more if they see a true Stark. She swallowed, recalling the stories of how wild these clans could be. We should keep our party small, just enough to protect me from bandits or Bolton scouts. Hother hesitated, then nodded. If that's what you want, we'll do it. I can't leave Last Hearth myself, not with everything in motion here. But I can assign you good men. And if the clans see you, Ned Stark's own daughter, that might sway them. He gestured for the castellan to be summoned, ordering him to prepare a scouting party of 12 riders. Word spread that Arya would set out at dawn. When she told Theon, he lowered his gaze. Take me too, he said. I can scout or I can be extra sword arm. I know you have men, but... Arya frowned. She could imagine the Umbers balking at letting Theon ride freely. Hother may not allow it. But that evening she raised the matter privately with him, and Hother considered, if he truly wants to prove his loyalty, perhaps it's best to let him. He'll be watched by my best men anyway. If he tries to run or betray us, we'll cut him down. When Arya relayed that warning to Theon, he only nodded grimly. So it came to pass that Arya, Theon, and a small company of Umber riders departed Last Hearth at first light. The air was bitter, the ground covered in a fresh crust of snow. Theon was given a shaggy brown gelding. Arya rode a chestnut mare. Their escort consisted of 10 hardened men armed with spears and axes, along with one of the castellan's aides to represent Hother's authority. They followed a winding path into the northern mountains where the peaks rose stark and jagged, the slopes draped in pine forests. The ride was arduous, often forcing them to dismount and lead their horses across icy scree or narrow defile. On the second day, they were deep in a ravine between towering cliffs. Twilight was falling and the wind whistled through the crags. The leading scout raised a hand to signal halt. Arya reined in her mare, peering ahead. The path took a sharp bend around a boulder the size of a small house. Beyond lay shadows with scarcely any visibility. The scout murmured, "We can't see what's ahead. Could be bandits. Let's send a couple forward to check." Before they could decide, a whistle pierced the air, sharp and ringing. At once, figures emerged along the cliffside above, clad in furs and leathers, pointing knocked arrows down. Arya's horse skittered, sensing tension. The Umbers grabbed for their weapons. Theon froze, scanning the heights. A voice shouted from above, "Throw down your steel, or we feather you where you stand." One of the Umber men spat, "Mountain clan filth." Another hissed, "They've the high ground on us. Best do as they say for now." Arya took a breath. "We came to treat with your chiefs," she called, her voice echoing in the rocky chasm. "We're friends to the clans, foes of the flayed man. I am Arya Stark of Winterfell." A pause followed. Then the voice responded, "A Stark? A girl? Show yourself, or we'll think you lie." Heart pounding, Arya nudged her horse forward. She pushed back her hood, letting them see her face. "We've come to seek an alliance against the Boltons. Let us pass. We only wish to speak with your leaders." Murmuring drifted among the hidden archers. Finally, one barked an order, and half a dozen armed figures slipped into view at the bend in the path. They carried crude but well-used weapons, a mix of swords, axes, and short bows. Their leader was a tall woman with braided gray-streaked hair, a scar splitting her chin. She leveled a stare at Arya. "You don't look like much of a Stark. You look like a half-starved stray." Arya swallowed. "It's been a hard journey, but I am who I say. Take me to your chief if you doubt it." The woman studied Arya's companions. She scowled at Theon. "That one stinks of treachery. I know him. That's Theon Greyjoy, the craven who burned boys at Winterfell." Arya's stomach twisted. Theon bowed his head. "I did terrible things," he said quietly. "Now I ride with the Starks, if you can believe it. I want the Boltons destroyed as much as you." The woman snorted, turning back to Arya. "We'll see. Come then. But if you try any trickery, we'll carve your hearts out and feed them to the goats." With that cordial welcome, they were escorted onward. The mountain clans vanished back into the shadows, reappearing at intervals, always above them with bows drawn. Arya's party had little choice but to comply. At last, they emerged into a wide hollow within the high peaks, a sort of natural bowl. Scattered huts and tents clustered near a smoking fire pit in the center. The wind whistled, carrying the tang of roasting meat. Dim shapes flitted between huts, watching the newcomers with suspicion. The woman led them to a large rock shelf partially sheltered by an overhang. Torches were stuck in crevices, illuminating a handful of figures sitting on fur-draped stools, the clan elders. Their eyes were keen, reflecting the flames. A stout man with braided beard rose as Arya drew near. He wore a patch over one eye and his bare arms were crisscrossed with scars. "I am Borak, chief of the Stone Crows," he rumbled, fixing Arya with a hard stare. "Who are you to disturb us at Winter's door?" Arya repeated her introduction, voice steady despite the tension. She showed the letter bearing her mother's direwolf seal, though the clansmen cared little for the fancy paper. They cared more for who she was and what she wanted. She explained that she had come to offer an alliance against the Boltons, who had seized the north and tormented all who opposed them. She said that House Stark would remember the loyalty of the mountain clans and treat them with respect if they helped expel the flayed man from Winterfell. Borak listened, expression unreadable. Now and then, the other elders, 3 men and 1 woman, grunted or spat or asked a question. They wanted to know what spoils would be theirs, what territory might be open to their people, how many men House Umber could muster. They sneered at mention of Theon Greyjoy, but asked how many Bolton men they might get to kill. Arya answered patiently, with occasional support from the Castellan's aide, who confirmed that Hothar Umber was mustering men at Last Hearth. At the end of it, Borak scratched his beard, eyeing Arya. "You've got guts, girl. Coming here with so few men, offering big words about a rising in the north. We've always hated the flayed man, but we've never found much difference between one highborn house or another." Arya set her jaw. "My father never flayed anyone, never demanded cruelty. The Starks stand for the north, not for wanton brutality." One of the elders snorted. Another spat. But Borak's gaze softened a fraction. "I remember Eddard Stark. He passed through these mountains once, years ago. He parleyed with our forefathers and left them in peace. No forced tithes, no burned huts. Maybe that was something. But if we join you, we want steel and food. We want fair trade for our goat cheese and hides. We want no more intrusions by your southern lords who think we're dogs to be whipped. Arya nodded earnestly. Agreed. Help us free the north from the Boltons, and I'll see that my supporters honor that agreement. Boric looked around at the elders. They conferred in low voices. Finally, the woman who had first ambushed Arya's party stepped forward. She introduced herself as Sava, a war leader of the burned men. We'll fight, not for love of you, but for the promise of driving out that bastard who hunts our people like beasts. We hear his hounds in the valleys at night. He kills for sport. We'll gather our best warriors, form raiding parties. Show us a target. We'll harass them, bleed them. She bared her teeth in a grim smile. But if you break your word, we'll come for you next. Arya swallowed. I understand. So it was done. The two clans agreed to send a contingent of their fighters, a few hundred at most, but fierce and expert in the mountains. They would coordinate with Hother Umber's men to harry Bolton supply routes and hamper the roads leading to Winterfell. They also spoke of other clans deeper in the peaks who might join if they heard the Stone Crows and Burned Men had declared for the Starks. Arya felt buoyed by the victory. It was only a start, but if the savage mountain folk lent their strength, it might encourage more lowland houses to see the Boltons could be resisted. That night, the clans welcomed them to stay in the hollow. It was not a feast in the southern sense, but they roasted goat and passed around strong liquor that burned Arya's throat. Theon hovered at the edges, uncomfortable beneath so many hostile stares. More than once, Arya saw a clansman sneer at him, calling him the traitor to Winterfell. At one point, a tall warrior shoved Theon and spat at his feet, demanding to know why the Turncloak should be allowed among them. Arya stepped in, putting a hand on her sword, and insisted that Theon was under her protection. It earned her some measure of grudging respect, though she suspected Theon would never be safe among these folk if he were alone. By dawn, they parted ways with the clan chiefs, leaving behind a few of the Umber riders to coordinate. Arya's group descended out of the mountains on a different track so as not to be ambushed again by more watchful clans. The first few days of travel went smoothly, though the snow deepened in places, forcing them to pick their route carefully. One afternoon, as they crested a wooded ridge, they spotted a distant column of riders moving along the valley below. Instantly, Arya's scout guided them into the cover of thick pine. They peered through the branches, hearts pounding. The riders below bore a banner, a flayed man on pinkish cloth. Bolton men. Perhaps 24 of them, accompanied by vicious-looking hounds trotting at their sides. Arya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Ramsay's huntsmen. Stay quiet, whispered the scout. We can avoid them if we stay above the tree line, circle around the ridge. They did so, leading their horses in silence, taking care not to break a single twig. The hounds below bayed as though they scented something, but the wind must have carried the group's smell away. Arya's heart hammered until the Boltons' column disappeared behind the crags. She thanked whatever gods were listening that they had not been found out. She could guess the fate awaiting Theon if Ramsay recaptured him. They pressed on, sleeping in hidden hollows or small caves until they at last returned to Last Hearth. It was near dusk when they rode up to the gates. The guards recognized them and let them pass. Arya felt relief at seeing the familiar courtyard again. Hother Umber greeted them in the hall where braziers glowed. Arya recounted their success, describing how the clans had pledged fighters to the cause. That's good news indeed, Hother said, beaming. We've had word from a Glover messenger as well. They don't openly promise men yet, but they've hinted they want the Boltons gone. They're biding their time, waiting to see if we can rally more support. And White Harbor, well, no direct reply yet, but rumor says Lord Wyman Manderley is furious at the phrase for the Red Wedding. If we can show him a Stark in the north, we might spur him to act. Arya felt hope stir in her chest. It was all tenuous, a fragile spiderweb of alliances, but it was more than she had dared dream a month ago. If more houses came around, they might truly stand a chance of restoring House Stark. Then her mind flickered to Jon. She wondered if, by some miracle, he might join them. But she remembered he was bound by his Night's Watch vows, sworn never to meddle in the wars of the realm. It pained her, yet she tried to accept that this was her task, not his. In the following weeks, Last Hearth became a hive of quiet preparation. Men from outlying Umberlands trickled in, each bearing spear or bow. The keep's courtyard was crowded with makeshift tents. By Hother's order, the forges ran day and night, crafting arrowheads, spear points, and repairing battered armor. Rations were stored, casks of salted fish and dried apples piled high. Snow fell steadily, dusting the ramparts. Despite the winter gloom, an undercurrent of anticipation ran through the halls as if they were on the cusp of a great turning. Arya worked tirelessly with the Castellan's aid, drafting messages and receiving envoys. She forced herself to be polite to men old enough to be her grandfather, to speak with authority in her father's name. When the clans sent their first warbands, she greeted them personally. They arrived in small, roving groups, rangy figures with painted faces and battered weapons, but they nodded curt respect to the wolf girl who had come to parley in their mountains. Each warband claimed a spot in the lower courtyard or along the outer yard. Sometimes fights broke out between them and the Umbermen, for they were unused to discipline. But Hother did his best to keep order, and each scuffle ended before any serious blood was spilled. Their presence lent an air of wild unpredictability. Arya found herself intrigued by their customs, yet also wary. Theon did what he could. He was rarely left unwatched, but Hother allowed him more freedom within the keep. Sometimes he would help the blacksmith carry iron or help fletch arrows, speaking in a low voice about technique from his days at Pike, where arrows had to be made to withstand sea spray. Some men still spat when he passed, but no open violence befell him. Arya noted that he walked with a stiffer spine now, not cowed entirely by shame. At times, she glimpsed a flicker of the cocky grin he had worn so often in the past, though it never lasted. He came to her one afternoon as she practiced archery in a corner of the yard. A light snow drifted down and her fingers were numb on the bowstring. She loosed an arrow which thunked into the target rin. Slightly off-center. Theon stood behind her, clearing his throat. "You shoot well." She lowered the bow. "Better than I used to, anyway." He hesitated, then murmured, "Thank you for letting me come on the journey. I feel less like a prisoner now. That's all." She studied him. "You're welcome. I couldn't very well hide you in the keep forever. If you're truly on our side, better to let you show it." He dipped his head, a ghost of a smile on his cracked lips. Then, as if summoning courage, he said, "If there's a battle soon, promise me you won't charge in blindly. You're brave, but you're not invincible." Arya felt a surge of emotion. She swallowed, thinking of Robb, of how he'd never had the chance to fight properly at the Twins, how betrayal had stolen that from him. She thought of their father, who had faced death with calm dignity. "I'll try to keep my wits," she said at last, not wanting to make empty promises. Theon looked relieved, as if he had feared she might snap at him. "Good. Because the Boltons, they fight dirty. Ramsay especially. There's nothing he won't do." She nodded, shivering not from cold but from the memory of Winterfell's dungeons. "We'll stop him," she said, forcing confidence into her voice. "He can't keep the North under his heel forever." Tom slid by in a haze of drilling, forging, planning. Then word arrived that Bolton forces had been sighted near the outskirts of the Dreadfort's domain, possibly gathering for a move westward. A clan scout reported that Ramsay had caught wind of trouble stirring at Last Hearth. He might march to quash it or lure them into an open fight. In the main hall, Hother and his advisors pored over a rough map of the region. Arya stood by, listening intently. "They outnumber us," one retainer said, frowning. "If they march an army here, we'd have to hold the walls. But we can't just hide behind defenses forever." Hother tapped the map. "If they come in strength, we can meet them halfway, with the clans providing guerrilla strikes. Bleed them on the road, then pull back to a chosen battleground where we have the advantage." Arya's pulse quickened. "It might work. We can lay traps or blockades. Force them to funnel through narrow passes." "And if Roose Bolton himself comes?" someone asked grimly. "He's cunning, calmer than his son. He might see our plan and outflank us." One of the mountain clan representatives leaned forward with a wolfish grin. "We know the passes better than any kneeler. If they try to outflank, we'll be waiting." Eventually they resolved on a plan. They would lure the Bolton forces north, feint retreat so that the clans could harry them from behind, and then confront them on a field the Umbers knew well, an old plateau near a frozen lake where thickwoods on either side could conceal flankers. It was risky, but if timed perfectly, they might trap Ramsay's men between two pincers. Hother insisted he would not start an all-out war unless it was certain the Boltons were indeed marching in force. But in truth, Arya sensed the time for caution was ending. The North was stirring to reclaim itself. Days later, a breathless scout galloped into Last Hearth, shouting that Bolton banners had been seen. At least 400 or 500 men, including horsemen, hounds, and rumored sellswords from the south. They were heading north along a winter track that would pass within a day's march of Last Hearth. Instantly, the keep erupted into controlled chaos. Horns sounded, men armed themselves, and a messenger was sent to the clan camps to warn them that the enemy approached. Arya helped gather supplies, her hands shaking with adrenaline. She saw Hawthorne mail that had once belonged to the Greyjoy, too large but close enough. She donned boiled leather herself, a simple tunic and jerkin that would allow her to move. She strapped a belt around her waist for her sword, stuffed her quiver with arrows. Theon was given a mail shirt, someone else's old kit, and a short sword. He wore it gingerly, as if not trusting himself. The Umber host marched out of Last Hearth an hour later, nearly 300 strong, bolstered by a ragged array of mountain clansmen. They left behind a small garrison, in case of a feint. The snow had let up, but the sky remained leaden with clouds, threatening more. The men trudged onward, hoisting spears, axes, and banners bearing the roaring giant of House Umber. Arya rode near the front with Hawthorne, Theon, and the senior captains. She glimpsed fear in the eyes of the foot soldiers, but also grim determination. This was the North's chance to strike a blow for House Stark. They reached the designated plateau by nightfall, making camp among the pines. Fires flickered in the gloom. Scouts were sent to watch for Bolton approach. Tension hung in the air. Arya huddled near a fire with Theon and a few clan warriors. She chewed on hard bread, her stomach too knotted for more. She wondered if she was truly ready for battle. She had killed before, yes, but not in open warfare. Images of Harrenhal ghosts, of the Red Wedding, of Winterfell's burning towers all whirled in her mind. She clenched her fists and repeated to herself that the Boltons must pay for their treachery, that she was not a helpless child. At dawn, the horns sounded. The enemy was close. Bolton outriders had been spotted picking their way around the outskirts of the plateau. The men roused quickly, stamping out fires, forming ranks. Hawthorne barked instructions, sending half the mountain warriors into the woods to lie in wait. The main Umber force took position in the open clearing, forming a defensive line behind a low ridge of snow-covered earth. Arya climbed a gentle slope that overlooked the field, her horse left tethered behind. She notched an arrow, scanning for movement. It came soon enough. The first wave of Bolton cavalry, the flayed man banner snapping in the wind. They rode in formation, maybe 50 strong, with hounds loping at their flank. Behind them marched ranks of foot soldiers. A tall figure in plate armor rode at the head, wearing the grotesque sigil of House Bolton on his surcoat. Arya's blood froze. Was that Ramsay himself, or some officer? She strained to see. She knew Roose Bolton often wore muted clothing, and Ramsay liked to flaunt the flayed man. Whichever one it was, they were here, confident enough to approach with banners high. Perhaps they believed the Umbers would yield or that their greater numbers ensured victory. A war horn blared from the Umber ranks. The lines surged forward, letting out a roar of defiance. Arrows whistled, unleashed by the Umber bowmen. A volley soared across the gap, striking among the Bolton foot, dropping a few men and horses. The enemy responded with their own archers. Arrows hissed overhead. Arya ducked and loosed an arrow in return, though she couldn't see if it found a mark. The cavalry spurred forward at a gallop, hounds baying. With a crash, they collided with the Umber front line. Spears braced. A horse screamed as it toppled. Men bellowed in pain. Chaos erupted. The foot soldiers clashed next, surging around the edges of the battered cavalry. Arya caught glimpses of steel meeting steel, men grappling in the snow, the swirl of banners. She saw an Umber man hacked down by a Bolton Sellsword, then another clan warrior bury an axe in the Sellsword's spine. The noise was deafening shouts, steel on steel, snarling dogs. She forced herself to keep calm, picking out targets for her bow. She aimed for a Bolton standard-bearer, released, and saw him topple. Another arrow flew at a hound snapping at a wounded Umber footman. Then she was out of time. An enemy soldier rushed up the slope at her, brandishing a sword. She flung her bow aside, drew her short sword, and braced. He swung overhead, roaring. She stepped under his blow, remembering the water dancer's grace. Her blade slipped into his side. He stumbled, eyes widening, blood staining his mail. With a snarl, he collapsed. She yanked her sword free, breath coming fast. Another Bolton man lunged at her from the flank, but Theon stepped between them, parrying. The jolt rattled Theon's battered blade. Arya pivoted, slashing the attacker's leg. He fell with a scream. Theon finished him with a quick stab. They shared a brief look. Shock, adrenaline, gratitude. All around them, the battle raged. The Boltons had more men, but they were strung out in the open, and the Umbers were using the terrain. A trumpet sounded from the trees. Suddenly, the mountain clans poured out from the pines, descending on the Bolton flank with wild cries. The ambush struck hard. Bolton soldiers wheeled in panic, trying to hold them off. The clans fought like demons, their axes rising and falling with savage ferocity. Arya glimpsed them pulling men from their horses, hacking them apart. The Bolton formation wavered. A vicious shape tore through the melee, large hounds set on snapping at the clans. Arya saw them bring down a stocky clansman, mauling him. The clans responded with spears. One hound yelped as a spear took it in the flank, another reeled away trailing blood. Still, the slaughter was gruesome on both sides. The ground turned slick with crimson slush. The air reeked of sweat, iron, and fear. In the midst of it all, Arya spotted a tall rider in ornate plate, the same figure she had glimpsed earlier, cutting down an Umber soldier with savage ease. A swirl of black hair spilled from beneath his helm. Ramsay, it had to be him. She felt a surge of hatred so intense it stole her breath. Theon saw him too, face pale. Ramsay reined his horse around, barking orders to rally a knot of Bolton men. Arya saw her chance. If they could take out Ramsay, the rest might lose heart. She started forward, slipping through the chaos with Theon at her side. Her path was blocked by fighting men, stabbing, grappling, hacking. She ducked a wild swing, slashed a soldier across the arm, and pressed on. Theon gritted his teeth, parrying another blow. An arrow whizzed between them, narrowly missing. Then she broke free of the scrum into a pocket of open snow. Ramsay was there, 10 yards away, glaring at the battlefield. She notched an arrow on reflex, aiming at him. The shot was tricky, she was panting, her muscles trembled. She let fly. The arrow streaked toward him but skittered off his plate, lodging in a gap near his shoulder but not piercing deeply. He snarled in pain, turning to see who had shot him. Their eyes locked. Arya felt raw fury radiate from him as if nothing else existed. He spurred his horse. In a single bound, the beast lunged forward. Theon tried to intercept, but Ramsay slashed down with a longsword, forcing Theon to reel away, nearly toppling. Arya barely sidestepped the horse's charge. Her second arrow fell from numb fingers. Ramsay wheeled around for another pass. She drew her short sword, heart racing. Could she even stand against him, mounted and armored? Before he could charge again, a group of Umber spearmen advanced. Ramsay cursed, striking out. His horse reared, hooves flailing. An Umber spear sank into the horse's flank, toppling the beast. Ramsay leapt clear, rolling to his feet. He battered aside a spearman with savage fury, then whirled just in time to see Theon rushing him. Theon swung, but Ramsay was faster, deflecting with a shower of sparks. He kicked Theon's wounded leg, sending him crashing down. Theon cried out. Arya lunged at Ramsay's back, but he spun, meeting her blade with his own. The impact jarred her arm. She staggered, pressing forward, teeth bared. They traded blows, steel ringing. Arya used her smaller size to dart inside his guard, but his skill was formidable and he struck with lethal speed. She ducked once, twice, feeling the blade whistle past her ear. She slashed at his thigh. He twisted aside, the tip scraping his armor. Rage contorted his face. "Stark bitch," he hissed. "I'll teach you some manners." He hammered down at her, forcing her to block or retreat. Her arms shook with each impact. She stumbled over a corpse in the snow. Ramsay lunged. She flung herself sideways, the blow slicing open her left shoulder's leather pad. Pain flared, warm blood soaking her sleeve. He grinned, triumphant. She struggled to keep her footing in the bloody snow. Then Theon was back on his feet, roaring in defiance. He tackled Ramsay from behind, grappling him. Ramsay snarled, elbowing Theon's weakened hand. Theon gasped, but he held fast, dragging Ramsay backward. "Arya," he shouted, voice raw. Arya seized her chance. Ignoring the pain, she lunged forward and thrust her sword into a gap in Ramsay's armor at his side. He howled. She twisted the blade, tears burning her eyes. She thought of Robb, of her mother, of all the horrors. For Winterfell, she hissed. Ramsay sank to one knee, blood pouring from the wound. He tried to speak, but only coughed wetly, eyes bulging with hate. She drove the sword in deeper. Then his body slumped into the snow. She almost collapsed, gasping. Theon stood trembling, blood trickling from his temple where Ramsay's elbow had struck him. They exchanged a stunned look. Ramsay's lifeless face stared blankly at the swirling snow. Around them, the battle still raged, but word spread quickly that the bastard of Bolton had fallen. Arya looked up to see Bolton men recoiling, some throwing down arms, others fleeing. The mountain clans howled in triumph, hacking down stragglers. Umbers pressed forward, chanting. Without their savage leader, the Bolton host began to crumble. The fighting petered out over the next hour. A few pockets of Bolton soldiers refused to yield and were cut down. Others surrendered, kneeling in the bloody snow while the Umbers and clans corralled them. Many scattered into the woods only to be harried by clan archers. The field belonged to the Stark loyalists. Victory was theirs, though it had come at a terrible cost in lives. Arya stood amidst the carnage, blood dripping from her gashed shoulder, legs trembling with exhaustion. She stared at Ramsay's corpse. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose in her, satisfaction, relief, horror at the brutality. She felt tears prick her eyes, remembering how many had suffered under him. Then Theon touched her arm gently and she turned to see him shaking with exertion and battered by fresh bruises. He managed a small, ragged smile. "He's gone," he whispered. "You did it. We did it." She nodded, tears slipping free. "We have to finish this. Roose Bolton is still alive somewhere. Winterfell is still in his hands." Hathu approached, limping from a cut on his thigh. The boy lord surveyed the bodies. "Ramsay's dead," he said, tone hushed. Then he looked at Arya with something like awe. "The bastard has tormented the North for too long. Now he's ended by the daughter of Eddard Stark." He let out a shaky laugh. "We stand a real chance now. The Bolton men who fled will bring the tale back to Roose. He'll know the North is rising." Around them, clansmen and Umber men raised ragged cheers, brandishing bloody weapons in the air. Chants of Stark, Stark, mingled with whoops of victory. It echoed off the pines, carried by the biting wind. Arya closed her eyes, letting the waves of relief wash over her. One monstrous foe was gone. The next step was Winterfell itself and Roose Bolton, the man who had orchestrated the Red Wedding with Walder Frey. For her mother, for Robb, for all the innocents, Arya would not rest until the flayed man was torn from her home. In the days that followed, they tended to the wounded. Pyres were built for the dead Umber, clan, and even Bolton men who'd fought honorably. Arya's shoulder was bound by the Umber maester, who insisted she rest in a makeshift infirmary tent. She dozed in and out of pain, still clad in her stained, torn leathers. She felt worn to the bone, but strangely alive. Theon visited her often, his own cuts dressed. He lingered near her pallet, silent as though seeking solace. She glimpsed the flicker of guilt in his eyes whenever he saw the hushed celebrations among the men. They hailed Arya as a hero, but Theon was still the turncloak. Yet he had helped kill Ramsay Bolton, saving Arya's life in the process. Some men now viewed him with a grudging respect. Once she was strong enough to walk again without collapsing, Arya joined Hathu and the leading captains to plan their march south. Roose Bolton would not sit idle, though losing Ramsay and part of his forces was a grievous blow. If other houses heard that the bastard of Bolton was slain by a living Stark, they might rise. Yet speed was crucial. Hathu proposed they march on Winterfell, linking up with any Glover or Manderley men who would join them on the way. The clans could harass the roads behind them, preventing any relief from the Dreadfort. It was a bold plan, but the momentum was with them now. Thus the battered army mustered once more, leaving behind the plateau that had witnessed their victory. The survivors marched in a column down old forest tracks, the wounded riding in wagons commandeered from local farmsteads. The mountain clan warriors roved ahead and behind, scouting and picking off any stray Bolton outriders. The pace was slow, hampered by thick snow and the need to keep watch for ambushes. But morale was high, buoyed by the knowledge that a Stark was leading them to reclaim Winterfell at last. One crisp morning, as the column wound alongside a frozen river, an envoy from House Glover arrived, 24 men in mail with the Glover fist sigil on their banners. Their captain approached Arya and Hathu with respectful nods. "We bring greetings from Lord Galbart Glover. News reached him of your victory over the bastard. He sends us to pledge arms for House Stark. Lord Glover will march with more men behind us." Arya smiled in relief. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. 2 days later, a smaller band of Manderley knights and infantry met them, the Merman banner snapping in the winter wind. The Manderley commander declared that Lord Wyman sent his goodwill and a token force, hinting that the rest of his strength would follow if the path to Winterfell was clear. The Manderleys had to be cautious under the eyes of the Freys and the Iron Throne, but they had no love for the Boltons. Each new contingent added to the growing host behind Arya like streams feeding a river. She felt stunned to realize she was at the head of it, a ragged, determined northern army forging south with the cry of Stark on their lips. Theon rode near her some days, silent. On others, he was at the rear with the baggage train or with the scouts, always under some watchful eye. Yet no one threatened him now. He had bled for them in battle, won a measure of acceptance. At night, when they made camp, he sometimes spoke quietly with Arya about the path ahead. Roose is cunning, he warned her. Don't expect a straightforward fight. He might hold Winterfell behind thick walls. He'll try to sow doubt or cause divisions among your allies. You have to be ready. Arya nodded, the weight of leadership pressing on her. She thought of her father's quiet wisdom, how he had juggled bannermen's loyalties and resolved disputes. She had no such experience, but she had Hother and the other lords to guide her. She steeled herself and thought, we fight for our home, for our family name. That's enough. When they finally came within sight of Winterfell, her heart clenched. The castle stood in the distance, its familiar towers and walls draped in winter's chill, though it still showed scars from the fires set during Theon's occupation and Ramsay's later havoc. Bolton banners flew from the battlements, an affront that made Arya's blood boil. They halted out of arrow range, forming a wide encampment. Scouts reported that the G. Atesh were shut tight, with a garrison of uncertain size inside. There was no sign of Roose Bolton or any attempt at sallying forth. The fight for Winterfell might become a siege if they could not coax or force the Boltons into open battle. As the allied lords conferred in a large pavilion, the question was raised, should they starve Winterfell out or try a direct assault? Arya remembered the hidden passages and tunnels beneath the castle from her childhood. She spoke of them to Hother and the others, though she admitted she did not know how well they might be guarded. Theon contributed what he knew of the walls and gates, pointing out that some sections were still weak from the earlier burns. Hother and the Glovers leaned toward a swift assault, not wanting to linger in a lengthy siege with winter deepening. The clans simply wanted to storm the walls and kill every Bolton man. Others argued that a cautious siege would preserve their strength. While they debated, a rider approached the camp under a white flag. He bore a message from Roose Bolton himself. Arya and the northern lords gathered to hear it. The rider, a sallow-faced man, read from a parchment, Lord Bolton offers terms. He will recognize Arya Stark and her allies, provided that they submit to him as Warden of the North. He denies any role in the murder of King Robb Stark or betrayal of House Stark, claiming the Freys bore sole blame for that tragedy. He says he desires peace and will pardon all those who lay down arms. The man finished, glancing around nervously. Lord Bolton says it is not too late to spare the realm more bloodshed. A growl of disbelief swept the pavilion. Hother spat on the ground. He lies. We all know the Boltons helped plan the Red Wedding. Peace under a flayed man is no peace at all. Theon sneered. Roose Bolton is cunning. He'll promise anything to keep his power. Then he'll flay you after you bend the knee. Arya stepped forward, fixing the messenger with a steely gaze. Tell your master that I remember the Red Wedding. My brother, my mother, they died because of Bolton treachery. There will be no peace until the flayed man is torn down. Winterfell belongs to the Starks. The North remembers. The messenger flinched, glancing around at the cold stairs. He turned and fled the pavilion, leaving the threat and the refusal hanging in the air. So, war it would be. They prepared to besiege Winterfell. The next day, Arya's hosts surrounded the castle, establishing siege lines out of arrow range. They set up catapults and scorpions scavenged or built with Umber ingenuity, though their supply of heavy siege weaponry was limited. They cut off supply roads so no provisions could reach the garrison. The mountain clans spread out across the countryside to intercept any riders who might sneak away. Winterfell's walls loomed, ancient stone that had withstood countless winters. Banners snapped along the ramparts. Sometimes they glimpsed men up there, but no one emerged. Roose Bolton would not yield easily. When a week passed without surrender or open battle, Hother decided they must attempt to breach the walls. The battered gates might be the best point of entry. Under the cover of night, a small force of volunteers approached with a ram. They were met by a hail of arrows and boiling pitch. Screams tore the darkness. Arya, watching from a rise, clenched her fists, cursing Bolton cruelty. The next night, they tried sappers, digging at a weak section of the outer wall. Again, the defenders were ready, setting traps in the rubble, launching flaming oil. More men died. Winterfell did not fall. On the third morning of the siege, a bitter wind whipped across the encampment. Arya stood with Theon on a frost-rimed rampart they had built for archers, scanning the parapets of Winterfell. Smoke drifted from the castle chimneys. Her mind was numb with exhaustion and dread. If we wait, we risk starving ourselves, she muttered. But if we storm again, we lose too many men. Theon's lips pressed thin. Roose might be biding his time, hoping to starve you out or that your allies will lose heart. Arya gazed at the castle, remembering the laughter of her siblings in the courtyard, her father's stern lectures, the forging of swords in the smithy. She felt tears burning. This is her home. I won't let him keep it. Then a thought struck her. The crypts. Father always said they ran deep, with passages rumored to exit into the Wolfswood. If we can find that exit, we might enter from below. Theon's eyes widened. That's true. I recall rumors of secret ways. Though if Roose knows them, he might have them guarded. She turned to him. Do you remember the well behind the old stable? Bran once said it connected to an underground stream, leading to the crypts. I'm not certain it's real, but if a small group could slip in at night, if the defenders are focused on the walls, we might open the gate from inside. He inhaled shakily. It's worth trying. You'll need a handful of men who know the castle well. His gaze flicked to her, uncertain. Should I come? Arya studied him. You know the layout too, and you helped me escape the dungeons. We'll need you if you're willing. He nodded, though fear flickered in his eyes. I owe it. Whatever happens. That evening, Arya proposed the plan to Hother and the other leaders. Many deemed it madness. Hother frowned, arms folded. One misstep and you're trapped underground with no escape. But if you succeed, the fortress could be taken swiftly. He looked at Arya with worry, as though reluctant to risk her life on such a gamble. But she insisted. I'm the only one who can navigate the crypts. I used to run there as a child. She glimpsed pride in some men's eyes at her bravery. So it was decided, a stealth mission through the rumored passage while the main force mounted a diversion at the walls. Under the cover of moonless night, Arya led a small party. Theon, 4 Umbermen, and 2 clan warriors. They slipped away from the encampment, circling around to the western edge of Winterfell's walls where the old stable had once stood. The ground was uneven and dotted with debris from the earlier sacking. They found the half-collapsed stable in the shadows. All was deathly silent. Above, the walls loomed. Torchlight glimmered along the battlements where sentries patrolled. But no alarm was raised. The group crept forward, hearts pounding. They found the old well, half-choked with rubble. Arya's memory guided them. They cleared stones quietly, wincing at each scrape. Finally, they hauled the wooden cover aside. A cold draft rose from below. Theon peered in, holding a torch carefully shielded with a scrap of cloth. It's deeper than I recall, he whispered. I see water at the bottom. One by one, they descended using ropes. Arya's heart hammered as she lowered herself into the darkness, the torch bobbing in Theon's hand above her. Her boots slipped on the slick stones. Water lapped around her calves when she reached the bottom. A narrow channel of black water trickled off into the gloom. The air was dank, dripping with echoes. The men followed, splashing softly. Torchlight flickered across the curved walls of an underground tunnel. They waded forward, bracing on the slippery floor. The tunnel sloped gradually, leading deeper beneath Winterfell. Now and then they had to crouch under low arches or edge around fallen debris. The stagnant water was bitterly cold, leaching warmth from her bones. She pushed aside fear, forcing herself to recall the layout she had once glimpsed on old maids' tongues. If they followed the stream, it should lead to a cistern connected to the crypts. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a drier passage where the stream diverted through a grated channel. Loose stones formed steps upward. They climbed, each footstep echoing. Eventually, the walls changed, becoming more finished, with carved niches. Arya's pulse quickened, the crypts. She raised her torch, revealing row upon row of old tombs. The stone likenesses of the ancient kings in the north loomed in the dimness, each statue holding a stone sword across its lap. This was the resting place of her forebears, where her father's statue might stand as well, though she could not bear to look for it. The group advanced cautiously. They heard faint sounds overhead, footsteps, distant voices. The castle's living inhabitants were unaware of the intruders below, or so it seemed. They crept through the crypts, occasionally forced to squeeze between pillars or skirt around collapsed sections. At length, they reached an ascending stair that Arya recognized. It should lead to a small antechamber near the back corridor of the Great Hall. Possibly it was blocked or guarded. They braced themselves, weapons drawn, as Theon gently tested the door at the top. It opened with a creak. They froze, waiting for a shout or alarm. None came. Quietly, they slipped out into the corridor. The air was different, still cold, but less stale. Torch sconces on the walls cast dim light. This part of Winterfell was in disrepair, rubble-strewn from old damage, the walls soot-stained. The distant murmur of men echoed somewhere ahead. Arya gestured for them to follow her toward the Great Hall entrance. That hall had once been partly burned, but presumably it was repaired enough for the garrison to use. If they could outmaneuver any guards and reach the main gate mechanism, they could let in Hothar's army. The plan hinged on the Umber and Glover forces creating a diversion outside the gates at just the right time, drawing guards away. She hoped they had timed it well. 2 Bolton men appeared at the far end of the corridor, carrying a lantern, speaking in low voices. Arya flattened herself against the wall. Theon and the others did the same. The men walked closer, apparently heading for the crypt stairs. She heard them grumble about a draft, about needing to check for breaches. The moment they were in range, Theon sprang, clamping a hand over one man's mouth while sliding a dagger into his neck. The second man started to yell, but Arya lunged, slicing across his throat. Their bodies slumped silently. She winced at the brutality, but no alarm was raised. Stepping over the corpses, they continued. They heard shouting from outside the keep. No doubt the northern host was feinting another attack. Perfect. If the Bolton garrison was distracted, they'd keep fewer men at the gatehouse. Arya's party split briefly, 2 clan warriors going to sabotage a secondary door. Arya, Theon, and the Umber men crept up a spiral stair leading toward the battlements. At the top, they surprised 3 more guards, dispatching them with swift cuts. The courtyard below flickered with torchlight. Shouts rang out, Bolton men rushing to defend the walls from the assault outside. Only a handful remained at the main gate mechanism. They rushed the platform, weapons raised. The gatehouse crew yelped in alarm. One tried to turn a crossbow on them, but Theon slashed his arm before he could loose the bolt. Another guard swung a poleaxe, catching an Umber man in the side, but Arya shot him through the neck with an arrow. He toppled off the platform with a crash. The remaining crewman dropped his weapon and begged for mercy. An Umber soldier struck him down anyway. Arya, breath-rasping, grabbed the lever that controlled the outer gates. She glanced at Theon. He gave a nod. She hauled it down, feeling the mechanism lurch. Chains rattled, and a deep rumble echoed through the castle's walls. The portcullis rose. A moment later, they heard war horns outside. Hothar's men were charging the open gate. Bolton soldiers in the courtyard realized too late what had happened. Men shouted warnings, some scrambled to block the gates. Theon and Arya fired arrows from the platform, picking off a few who tried to lower the portcullis again. Then the first wave of Umber and Glover troops surged into the courtyard. The clans joined, screaming war cries. Steel clashed on stone. The defenders broke in confusion, some fighting desperately, others fleeing deeper into the keep. Arya saw one group rush for the main hall. Theon cried, "They'll try to barricade themselves. We must secure the castle." It became a chaotic storming of Winterfell's interior. Allies flooded in from the gates, scouring corridors, subduing Bolton pockets. Arya led a group into the Great Hall, where a dozen Bolton men were making a last stand behind overturned tables. At the sight of her, they spat curses. Crossbow bolts hissed overhead. Her men rushed in. A fierce melee followed, tables splintering, torches toppling. Arya ducked a sword swing, battered the man's arm aside, then drove her blade into his gut. She glimpsed Theon brawling in the corner, grappling with a Bolton sergeant. Another crossbowman tried to reload, but an Umber axeman leapt onto him with an enraged cry. In moments, it was over. The hall was theirs. Outside, more horns rang out. She could hear the din echoing through the castle. The last defenders were collapsing or surrendering. She prayed that Roose Bolton was still here and had not fled. Determined, she rushed through the hall, heading for the Lord Solar. The memory of her father's presence spurred her on. At the door to the Solar, a handful of Bolton retainers braced pikes. Behind them stood a tall, pale figure with hooded eyes, Roose Bolton himself. He wore dark leather adorned with his sigil, lips set in a grim line. "You come for me, girl?" he said softly, voice edged with contempt. "Your father was a fool. So was your brother." Arya felt fury flare. "You betrayed my family. You butchered them at the twins. I've come to claim your life." Roose signaled his men to attack. Theon and 2 Umbers rushed forward to meet them. Arya darted around the flank, trying to reach Roose directly. The battle was swift yet brutal. The pikes stabbed forward. One Umber was impaled, but Theon parried another thrust and slashed the pikeman's throat. Arya closed on Roose, but he drew a dagger, moving with unnerving calm. He stepped to the side, using one of his men as a shield. She stabbed that man in the side, and he crumpled. Roose tried to slip away, heading for a side door. Theon blocked him, brandishing his sword. Bolton's expression darkened. Roose lunged at Theon with shocking speed, slashing at his chest. Theon staggered, trying to parry. Arya slashed at Roose's back, forcing him to whirl. He caught her sword arm with his dagger hand, twisting viciously. She cried out, dropping the blade. He tried to plunge his dagger into her ribs, but Theon seized Roose's wrist, struggling with him. The older man was strong, but Theon fought with desperate intensity. Arya snatched up a fallen pike from the floor and drove it forward. Roose turned at the last moment, and the pike skewered his chest. His eyes widened, blood bubbling at his lips. Arya pulled it free, bracing for some last treachery. But Roose's knees buckled and he collapsed without another word. A hush fell over the solar. Theon stood panting, battered, eyes locked on Roose Bolton's corpse. Arya sank to her knees, relief coursing through her veins. The final blow had been struck. Roose Bolton was dead. House Bolton's claim to Winterfell was done. The flayed man's banner would be torn down at last. In the courtyard, word spread like wildfire. Men cheered, some wept, others pounded their shields in exultation. The remaining Bolton loyalists threw down their arms. Freed captives stumbled out of the dungeons, among them a few survivors from various northern houses. Winterfell, her home, was in Arya's hands again. And though it lay in ruin, scarred and blackened, it was hers. The North remembered. In the days that followed, they cleared the corpses, extinguished fires, tended the wounded. Lords Glover and Manderly arrived in person, pledging fealty to Arya Stark, the rightful Lady of Winterfell, if she would have that title. They convened in the great courtyard under a hastily raised direwolf banner amid the rubble. Hother Umber knelt, offering her the sword of his house. The heads of the mountain clans bowed with savage pride. Arya, standing before them, felt lightheaded with the enormity. She had not asked for this, but here it was. She recalled her father's face, the weight of the North's loyalty upon him. She realized that if none of her older siblings returned, she was the last hope of House Stark. A swirl of emotion almost robbed her of speech. She accepted their oaths solemnly, voice wavering. I am Arya Stark, daughter of Eddard. You've bled for me, risked your lives to restore Winterfell to its rightful line. I swear by the old gods and the new that I will strive to be worthy of your faith. The North is our home, and together we will heal these wounds. Her words carried across the courtyard, echoed by a chorus of cheers. She saw Theon standing at the edge of the crowd, head bowed. She met his eyes. He gave her a slight nod, tears glinting on his lashes. A strange warmth spread in her chest. She thought of the horror he had endured, the guilt he carried, and how he had helped her reach this moment. He might never wash away his sins, but he had chosen to stand with her, and that mattered. In the following weeks, the tattered army remained in Winterfell, repairing walls and gates, burying the dead. Lords came from across the north to see if the rumors were true. Some offered unconditional loyalty, others arrived with caution. But each one beheld the battered girl who had slain Ramsay Bolton and helped kill Roose Bolton, who now held Winterfell under a united banner of Umbers, Glovers, Manderlys, and the fierce mountain clans. They saw the dire wolf flying again above the castle. Slowly, the North began to rally behind Arya Stark. She walked the ramparts each morning, remembering childhood, remembering everything she had lost. Yet the halls were no longer silent. Smiths hammered, soldiers trained, courtiers bustled with messages. Laughter began to echo in small corners of the keep, though grief lingered like a shadow. There was talk of coronations, of proclaiming her queen in the north. Arya balked at that. I am no queen, she said firmly, but I am a Stark, and Winterfell is my seat. So they hailed her as Lady Arya of Winterfell instead, or the Wolf Girl. She accepted it, though she felt unsteady wearing such authority. Often, she would stand by the broken towers and watch the rebuilding. One late afternoon, as snow drifted down, she found Theon in the old Godswood, kneeling beside the pool where the heart tree stood. His shoulders trembled. She approached quietly, recalling how the Godswood had once been her father's place of prayer. She saw Theon's tears. He sensed her presence and turned, wiping his cheeks. I was praying, he murmured, voice raw. Not sure if the old gods would listen to a wretch like me, but I wanted to say thank you. And I'm sorry. She knelt beside him, the snow crunching. You stood by me. You helped me. I forgive you, for whatever that's worth." He closed his eyes, bowing his head. The old weirwood's face, carved centuries ago, watched them with solemn red eyes. A hush fell over the godswood, broken only by the soft swirl of wind. Arya placed a hand on Theon's shoulder. Perhaps neither of them could fully forget the horrors or the betrayals, but they had found a fragile redemption here in the twilight of winter, with the north reclaimed and the flayed man cast down. They rose and returned to the castle, footsteps echoing on the stones. Above them, on the highest tower, the direwolf banner snapped proudly in the cold breeze. Servants hurried to and fro, carrying timbers to rebuild the battered walls. Soldiers in stark livery patrolled the yard. Smoke drift from the great chimneys, signifying warmth and life, had returned to Winterfell. The North remembered, and the North had avenged itself under the banner of a Stark girl and a broken turncloak who found new purpose. Though war still simmered in distant corners, here in these ancient halls a measure of justice had been done. At night, Arya often dreamed of her family, Ned smiling gently, Robb with his wolfish grin, Bran and Rickon running through the corridors. Sansa, somewhere out there in the wide world, maybe still dreaming of songs. Jon at the wall, wrapped in black. She carried them in her heart. She had reclaimed their home and upheld their honor. For now, that was enough. She was Arya Stark of Winterfell, and this was her place. When dawn's first light touched the towers each morning, she rose with renewed determination, ready to protect what they had won. Theon Greyjoy, no longer Reek, stood with her, a true ally in the twilight of winter, helping to forge a new chapter for House Stark and for the North. And so, among the ruins slowly transforming back into a living castle, their story carried on, shaped by loyalty, redemption, and the unbreakable bond of a home reclaimed.